With Silverfield falling back under Top Hat's control, the Chupacabra fighting force was surrounded in the dust flats. The Chupacabra HQ, located in Pewterkirk, was cut off from the rest of their army and now vulnerable to be captured or destroyed themselves. At this point, I want to talk to you about this gem of a book. No, this is not a word from the sponsor or something like that. I actually have a point to make using this book, so hang in there. This is The Art of War by Sun Tzu, but with the thought-provoking and insightful remarks by the fictitious character Jamie Wolf, founder of the mercenary unit Wolf's Dragoons, arguably the most famous mercenary unit in BattleTech lore. Anyway, Jamie Wolf is a sensible mercenary with a good balance between aggression, strategy, and business sense. On page 90, there's a good remark that his character makes, and I quote, "A mercenary commander should buy their retreat with whatever coin they have left. Better to surrender the world and 10% of your material forces than in your command and your career. It's just business." The current situation on the Archer Sierra, the Chupacabras realize that they have been checkmated. Luckily, both combat forces on Archer Sierra are mercenaries. Sensible mercenaries would enter into negotiations to nullify the contract of Pinkerton Defenses, a subsidiary of Hefe's Chupacabras. Top Hat won the conflict, but they wouldn't want to risk personnel and mechs just to completely eliminate the threat forces. And Pinkerton Defense would prefer to break a contract and lose some profit than to lose their lives. Plus, these so-called Chupacabras have some bargaining chips. For example, the Alyena Mercantile League has a spy operating in Port Easteridge, which could easily be captured by Pinkerton Defense. That operative has some value and can be traded for more favorable conditions of surrender. Yep, all there would be left to do is to disarm the explosive devices at the starport, contact insurance companies, and finalize negotiations for favorable end to the conflict that is beneficial and acceptable to both mercenary outfits. Both players agreed that if this was their mercenary units, that is how things would play out. But that's not what happened. You see, there's a cookie cake at stake, and we're playing a game, so the players had a gentleman's agreement to not be sensible. In a nutshell, the conflict continues. When Silverfield fell, the Top Hat player had a brief moment of concern. You see, the HQ unit captured at Silverfield belonged to the Murphy's Misfits, not the HQ for the Chupacabras. Was there another Chupacabra force deployed on the asteroid that he was unaware of? He went back through his notes and strategic actions, counting the number of times his opponent used dropships, which was not very many. He also reviewed the intel reports that the Patreon members uncovered over the summer. Nope, turns out the Chupacabras were indeed surrounded and logistically cut off. But that means the HQ unit might be nearby, so he sent P4 and Rise, Shine, and Dominate on a force recon to see if he could find and pin down the Chupacabras HQ. Spotting the enemy probing for their location, the Chupacabra HQ evacuated Pewterkirk, while ordering his attack force to prepare an attack for Port Reaverwall. Several of you left comments in the last episode calling for a Hail Mary attack, and Pinkerton Defense, subsidiary of Hefe's Chupacabras, completely agrees. But there's one little hiccup. You see, in order to organize the chaos, the players and I had an agreement that the command and control for their armies limits their capacity of attacking force to 6 lances, or approximately 2 companies of combat units. However, for this battle, the players knew that this was likely the last hurrah, so they wanted to throw everything they possibly could into the battle. And of course, me being a pushover, I agreed and let them go ham. With the Chupacabras spotted on the horizon at Port Reaverwall, Top Hat collapsed in what forces he had available from his perimeter. Remember, the players are still limited by strategic actions on what they can move around the battlefield, so they can't send everything they've got. The Chupacabras had reinforcements that had been standing by on planet Roadside, using Aerodyne dropships, including one that was commandeered from the planet below. A story for another time, perhaps. The Chupacabras positioned additional reinforcements in orbit of Archer Sierra, waiting for an opportunity to deploy to the battle. Well, you get the picture. Both sides are throwing forces at each other and seeing what happens. So, without further ado, this is the finale, the Battle of Port Reaverwall. Welcome to Port Reaverwall. The attackers have multiple objectives and a few ways they can play this battle out. The contract states that the objective is to completely destroy 3 starports on Archer Sierra. one has been destroyed. One is rigged with explosives and is ready to be destroyed, and this is the third starport. So, how does one destroy a starport? Simple, you start blowing stuff up. But there are particular buildings that need to be destroyed. These buildings have red markings, and those have blue markings. All of the red and blue buildings must be destroyed in order to take this starport completely offline. That might be a tall order since each building has a construction factor of 5, meaning it has 5 hit points. But to cripple the starport, all of the red or all of the blue buildings must be eliminated. A few of each is not enough. Crippling the starport is not the objective, but it's better than nothing. And it depends on how the player explains it to their boss. You know how these things go. There are 2 aerospace perimeter defense weapons that can shoot down inbound dropships. They cannot target ground units, but if the player takes these 2 towers out, then dropships can land and depart without being shot out of the sky. Okay, back to the attacker's options. They could try to A. destroy the entire starport, or B. cripple it. They also have the option to take the defensive towers down, and therefore they can land reinforcements or escape the battle with what forces they have left standing. Now, just to cover all options, yes, the player could just sprint his mechs through the battlefield and exit at the top right corner and depart towards Trapperthorn Junction, into the waiting embrace of Del's Guard. The Chupacabras don't want to do that, but it is an option. The defender's objective is simple: destroy the enemy. Alright, let's have a look at the attackers. The first lance of the first mech company is comprised of a Highlander, Blood Asp, a Grizzly, and a Masakari. The second lance, the once upon a time Red Marauder Lance, has a Marauder that was destroyed at the Battle of Dust Flats. It has been replaced with the Dragonfly from the Reserve Company. The rest of the lance has a Javelin and 2 Centurions. The third lance, the Blue Marauder Lance, has a Marauder, a Rifleman, and 2 Centurions. Unfortunately, one of the Centurions was also destroyed in the Dust Flats and has been replaced with the last mech of the Reserve Company, the Wolfhound. The entire Reserve Company has been depleted, and therefore, no more replacement mechs are available. The first lance of the second mech company is comprised of a Charger and 2 Grasshoppers. The second lance has a Devastator, Quick Draw, a Kraken, and the mighty Yellow Jenner. The third lance is comprised of a Locust, a Panther, a Jenner, and a Flea. Coming in as additional support, the Inner Sphere Battle Armor Lance, as well as the morally compromised Ontos tanks. Both the Battle Armor Infantry and the tanks will immediately deploy, costing the player a total of 150 war chest points. In a holding pattern, waiting to deploy to the battlefield, there are 2 Aerodyne dropships. Aboard the first dropship is the Caesar Hawk Limited Liability Company, which is comprised of a veteran Phoenix Hawk 2C and a regular skilled Caesar. On the other dropship, a pair of Vendetta tanks, 1 LRM carrier and 1 SRM carrier, forming an ad hoc lance from the 17th Cav Regiment, a unit of a local warlord who has accepted donations from the Alien and Mercantile League. Once the player calls for them to land, each lance will arrive on the next turn, paying 75 war chest points for each of the dropships. Now there are 2 civilian designated landing zones. Top Pad could overrun these positions to prevent landing, but on this asteroid there is not much blocking terrain like there is on Blue Hole. And Aerodyne dropships are like house lions. You know, domesticated cats. If they fits, they sits. Okay, let's have a look at the defenders. Garrisoned at Port Reaverwall was both the second and third mech company of Top Hat. The second mech company's first lance is comprised of a Loki, an Orion, a Banshee, and an Atlas. The second lance has a Pouncer, Griffin 2C, a Bushwhacker, and a Blackjack. The third lance has an Oscout, 2 Wasps, and a Chameleon. The third mech company, first lance, has a Wraith, 2 Phoenix Hawks, and a Black Hawk. Second lance is comprised of a Dasher, a Spectre, a Firefly, and an Assassin. The third lance is a heavy battle lance with 2 Banshees, a Kingfisher, and a Zeus. Chasing the Chupacabras across the Dust Flats is Top Hat's first mech company. Its first lance is a fire lance with 2 archers, a longbow, and a trebuchet. The second lance has 2 operational hatchmen. The other 2 were destroyed in a previous battle. The third lance has 2 Blackjacks, a Shadowhawk, and a Starslayer. Top Hat plans on deploying their first mech company at the beginning of the third turn, paying the resources necessary. Flying in on a pair of Cat V-19s is the assault infantry that destroyed the comms array at Thaumadrift. The player will roll dice at the beginning of each round to determine when they will arrive. Now the Top Hat player has sort of figured out what the Chupacabras are here for, to either destroy the starport or take out the defense towers in order to escape or land reinforcements. But according to Top Hat's intelligence reports, the Chupacabras don't have much reinforcements at all. So the Top Hat player will deploy his forces with the intent to box the Chupacabras in this location and destroy them. Let's see how that plays out. But before we do, we wish to thank all our Patreon supporters for your generous support. We also want to notify you in a noticeable notifying notification of a new notable noble taking up the noteworthy noble cause of supporting the channel, and has thus been denoted as a notable noble. Thank you, Liam B, for your noble support. You have our undying gratitude. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, none of the mechs and vehicles have received repairs from the previous battles, so there is quite a few mechs showing up to this battle missing armor and suffering from structural and critical damage. Also, due to time constraints, we decided to activate units by their element size instead of by their individual lances. Therefore, companies with 3 lances will all take their movement when the company is activated, but the individual lances, such as the vehicles and infantry lances, will all activate and move as normal. Top Hat deployed his 3rd mech company in the northern sector of the installation, while the 2nd mech company is deployed in the southern and center portion of the starport. The Chupacabras won the initiative. The Top Hat Alliance will move and shoot first. Top Hat also has assault infantry en route to this battlefield, and I guess they're not in a hurry because they rolled a 4. They still have 26 distant points left to go. Top Hat activates his 2nd mech company. The Pouncer and Griffin jump forward, while the rest of the lance ground moves forward. The light battle lance ground moves to the elevated rail, using it as cover for their fire line. The heavy battle lance ground moves forward, taking up a fire position just behind the light battle lance. The Chupacabras activate their 1st mech company. Since this company has the best long-range weapons, they deploy in the north, grabbing what cover they can while setting their sights on the aerospace defense towers in the distance. The Alliance activates the Top Hat's 3rd mech company, and the lances shift around their positions to keep their TMM up and still have cover from the approaching Chupacabras in the north. It's the Chupacabras' turn to activate the remainder of their forces, so the Chupacabras send in their tanks. From this position, they have a clear view of the southern aerospace defense tower. The Chupacabras also activate their 1st mech company. The Flea and Locust ground move into cover of those industrial towers. The Panther sprints into cover while the Jenner jumps into cover of that crater. The Grasshoppers jump to the top of that rock formation, taking cover behind that structure. The Charger takes up a position next to the tanks. With the mighty Yellow Jenner up front, the so-called Heavy Battle Lance ground moves in formation at the center of the map. And finally, the Chupacabras activate their battle armor infantry, and they sprint into cover behind the craters and in front of those mechs. With movement complete, we go into the shooting phase. The Top Hat mercenaries will shoot first. Top Hat has his entire 2nd mech company split their fire between the 2 tanks and the Charger mech. Target numbers range from 9 to 10 due to the range and jumping. The Pouncer, Griffin 2C, and the Bushwhacker hit 1 tank, dealing 4 damage to its armor. This necessitated the tank to make 3 motive system checks, passing 2 but failing 1. This reduced the movement of the tank by 2 and reduces its TMM to 0. The Banshee and Atlas also nailed the Charger, which dealt 4 damage to the mech. This stripped away all the armor and inflicted 1 damage to its structure. This caused critical damage check and its fire control. Top Hat then focused their entire 1st mech company on the 2 Grasshoppers and that poor fell of a Flea. The target numbers for the Grasshoppers ranged from 8 to 10, and it's an 11 for the Flea. The Flea received a critical hit from the Firefly, but that didn't matter because the Firefly's damage alone was enough to destroy the Flea, though it can still shoot back this turn. Using lucky points, the Banshee, the Kingfisher, and one of the Phoenix Hawks hits the blue Grasshopper, dealing 10 damage. This took out all of its armor and did 3 damage to the mech structure. This also caused critical damage to its weapons. The Chupacabras can now return fire. The Charger and the 2 Ontos tanks open fire on the southern aerospace defense tower. The Charger and one of the tanks hit, dealing more than enough damage to vaporize the tower. The Masakari then lines up its sights on the northern aerospace tower. It opens fire and misses with snake eyes. I am sure there were quite a few sidelong glances shared amongst the mech warriors. However, using a lucky point, the Masakari was able to re-roll the dice and rolled a 9, dealing 6 damage to the tower and destroying. After ensuring both towers were destroyed, the entire 2nd mech company of the Chupacabras opened fire on 4 of the blue objective buildings, destroying all 4. The wreckage of the destroyed buildings is still providing cover, but it will no longer break line of sight starting next turn. The Chupacabras that were not firing at the buildings then opened fire on the Viper and the blue Phoenix Hawk. The Phoenix Hawk was hit by the Blood Asp, dealing 5 damage and completely removing the mech's armor. The Grizzly hit the Firefly, dealing 4 damage. This wiped out all of its armor and dealt 1 damage to its structure, causing critical damage to the weapons. With shooting complete, turn 1 comes to a close. With the 2 aerospace towers destroyed, the Chupacabras can land their dropships without any risks. All of the red buildings still stand. However, the Chupacabras have destroyed 4 out of the 6 blue buildings, with the loss of one of their own mechs. This battle is going to be a rough one, I can tell already. Top Hat won the initiative, so the Chupacabras will need to move and shoot first. And the first thing they did was deploy their 2 dropships to the battlefield. The dropship in the north is carrying the Ad Hoc Armor Lance, and the dropship in the south is carrying the Caesar Hawk Duo. The Top Hat player wasn't surprised. It was about time for a large-scale battle, and to see if his nickel and dime strategy has paid off or not. Were the Chupacabras about to bite off more than they can chew? Or has Top Hat met its demise? Top Hat checks the distance on his inbound assault infantry. He rolled a 9, so that leaves 17 distant points left to go. The arrival of the dropships has inadvertently created an opportunity for the Top Hat player to exploit. The southern dropship has become an obstacle that blocks line of sight. He sees it as a chance to move his second mech company towards the Chupacabra's southern flank and close with his enemy. His light and medium mechs storm the perimeter of the dropships, while the rest of the company moves into cover and scanning for any potential targets. Remember that in turn 3, which is the next turn, Top Hat's first mech company will arrive directly behind the Chupacabra's attacking force, so the Top Hat player wants to be in position and ready to make his move. For proportional movement, the Chupacabras activate 3 units. First, the dropship offloads their warriors onto the battlefield. The Phoenix Hawk 2C and the Caesar move into cover behind that crater. The Ad Hoc Armor Lance ground moves into position to have shots at Top Hat's mechs hiding amongst the settlement's buildings. The last activation goes to the Battle Armor, who use their jump jets to leap over the crater and advance on Top Hat. It's Top Hat's turn to move, and he activates his third mech company. Just like with the other dropship, he wants to exploit the dropship's inadvertent creation of blind spots that he can exploit with his light and medium mechs. He's hoping that the next turn the dropships will depart, giving the false sense of fire superiority to the Chupacabras, who will take the bait and close on the lighter mechs, and by doing so, getting themselves surrounded when his first mech company arrives. And while the lighter mechs are supposedly charging the dropships, the heavy mechs reposition behind cover. The Chupacabras can now move his last 3 units. He realizes Top Hat is using the dropships to break line of sight and advance on his flanks, but he decides not to let that concern him. This is an all-or-nothing battle, so he gives the order for a general advance. With the exception of his once-upon-a-time red Marauder Lance and a few other mechs which were taking cover in the craters, they all stand still. They are lining up their sights on the remaining blue buildings that have yet to be destroyed. The rest of the Chupacabras either jump or ground move forward. With movement complete, we go into the shooting phase. The Chupacabras will shoot first, and the light mechs open fire on the remaining blue buildings, destroying them both. The Chupacabras then split their shooting between 2 targets, the Zeus and the Kingfisher, who are both technically still standing behind cover. So the target numbers were all over the place. In the end, using lucky points, the Phoenix Hawk 2C, the Caesar, and the Charger were able to hit the Zeus for 10 damage. This wiped out all the armor and dealt 4 structure damage. This necessitated 2 critical checks. The first damaged the engine of the mech, and the other had no effect. As for the Kingfisher, the Blood Asp, Quick Draw, and Devastator all hit, dealing 13 points of damage. This stripped all the armor off and also dealt 4 points of structure damage, but it was lucky and didn't suffer any critical damage. But both mechs are in pretty bad shape, barely holding themselves together. Top Hat can now return fire. They also split up their shooting, focusing on mechs that are vulnerable to be dropped quickly. The heavy mechs taking cover behind the elevated rail take aim at the Jenner and the Panther in cover of those craters. The target number was 9 since the Jenner and Panther had stood still in cover. The Banshee and Atlas hit the Panther, dealing 5 damage, which nearly took the mech out, and they also caused critical damage to fire control. The Orion and Loki hit the Jenner, dealing 7 damage, which was enough to take the mech out. Next up, the Bushwhacker, Blackjack, the 2 Banshees, and the battered Zeus and Kingfisher opened fire on the Caesar. The target number was 8, and using lucky points, they all hit except the Banshees, dealing a total of 14 damage, which was enough to destroy the mech. Well, that guy didn't last long, did he? It must be the Ides of March or something. Next up, the light and medium mechs take aim at the Phoenix Hawk and open fire. Target number ranged between 10 and 12 because some of the mechs were at long range while the rest were at medium. And despite all that shooting, only the Black Hawk hit, dealing 2 damage to the mech's armor. Since these mechs didn't have any targets, they decided to open fire on the enemy dropship parked right next to them. The target number was immaterial. It wasn't a question if they could hit the dropship, rather did they have enough damage output. Unfortunately, these mechs' combined damage output was 14, but the dropship has 17 hull points and 4 structure. They put a hurting on the dropship, but its armor didn't fail. That's one heck of a repair job. Goes to show you, landing a dropship on a battlefield is a dangerous undertaking. One thing to note, in our games, dropships are not equipped with weapons. A player had a bad experience where dropships were used as mobile fortresses. I mean, it's a good strategy, but that takes away from the game of BattleTech, at least for the player it did. So our house rule is that these things provide armored transport, and that's all. And with shooting complete, that brings turn 2 to a close. All of the blue buildings were destroyed, and the Chupacabras are now fully deployed to the battlefield with successful landing of their 2 Aerodyne dropships. The Chupacabras lost 2 more mechs, and Top Hat has been lucky and has not lost any mechs yet. The Chupacabras have spent a good portion of their shooting taking out buildings. Now that they successfully crippled the starport, will they focus on taking out the enemy, or try to snipe the red buildings? Let's find out. On to turn 3. Top Hat checks the distance on his inbound assault infantry. He rolled a 5, so they are 12 distant points away, but closing in. But what does arrive to the battlefield is Top Hat's first mech company. But where should they deploy? Since the Chupacabras have massed in the north, he plans to deploy directly behind the advancing Chupacabras. In the south, his heavy lance will hold the line, while his light mechs attempt to turn the Chupacabra's southern flank. Well, that's his plan at least. The Chupacabras had originally planned for the dropships to remain on the battlefield, to provide as much cover as possible and perhaps a way to evacuate some of his forces once the Hail Mary attack was complete. But cover works both ways, and Top Hat was using the dropships to block line of sight so that he could advance his light and medium mechs. Plus, one dropship is already being Swiss cheesed, so the player evacuates the dropship back to the holding area and leaves the northern dropship on station to still provide cover. The Chupacabras still have 6 red buildings left to destroy. Their southern forces are at risk to being flanked, and as sensors report, a threat is closing in behind them. It's a bad day to be a Chupacabra. But they did win the initiative, so Top Hat will need to move and shoot first. Top Hat activates his second mech company. The Heavy Lance, Blackjack, and Bushwhacker all are in cover, so they stand still, holding their line of defense. The light and medium mechs jump forward to increase their TMM, while placing them in an ideal position to engage the southern Chupacabra force. For proportional movement, the Chupacabras activate their ad hoc armor lance and their battle armor infantry. Both units maneuver towards Top Hat's center, where the heavily damaged Zeus is located. Top Hat can now activate a unit, and he has a choice to make between his third mech company or he can deploy his first mech company. The player wants to maximize the impact of his first mech company. According to the player, this particular rock formation leaves him with 2 options. You see, the player identifies that the terrain has divided the Chupacabra's northern force into 2 parts, the Kraken section and the Blood Asp section. He could deploy behind the Kraken section, but they will just turn around and face him. This would leave the rear arc of the Kraken exposed, but he is at medium and long range from the rest of Top Hat's forces, so he might not be in danger. The same is true if he deploys behind the Blood Asp group. They will simply turn around and face him, and with the added protection of a dropship blocking line of sight to his rear arc. Or maybe not. There is a gentleman's agreement to not be sensible, you know. So the player holds off on deploying his first mech company and instead activates his third mech company. All the light mechs with jump jets leap to the top of the dropship right in front of the Blood Asp group. The rest of the mech company ground moves into cover. This is certainly not what the Chupacabra player had in mind for his dropships. For proportional movement, the Chupacabras must activate 3 units. The player activates his second mech company, his Lonely Phoenix Hawk 2C, and his Ontos Tank Lance. Somehow he's got to take out those red buildings. To both threaten and distract the flanking Top Hat mechs, the Grasshoppers use jump jets to jump directly in front of the Griffin 2C with the Ontos tanks advancing behind the mechs. The rest of the company ground moves towards the map's center, trying to line up shots on the red buildings. The Phoenix Hawk 2C and the Charger, kicking the walls out of their way, Move right up to cover directly in front of the Top Hat Bushwhacker and Blackjack. Top Hat activates his last company, the first mech company, and they deploy right behind the Blood-Asp Lance. Unfortunately, the Chupacabra company has not activated yet, so the hatchetmen cannot use their hatchets. Top Hat wants to get close, but not too close. He doesn't want to give the opportunity to the enemy to get behind him. The Chupacabras activate their last unit, their first mech company. The light mechs, led by the Dragonfly, continue to advance up the map's center. However, the Blood-Asp Lance and the Blue Marauder Lance turn on Top Hat's advancing company. They ground move, tucking in behind the rocks. They're at point-blank range with Top Hat, but line of sight for most of the mechs on the dropship has now been blocked. With movement complete, we go into the shooting phase. Top Hat will shoot first. The Kingfisher, Zeus, and the two Banshees all open fire on the Devastator with a target number of 8. Using lucky points, they all hit, dealing a total of 13 damage to the Devastator. This left the mech with 1 structure point left, but that didn't matter because the Dasher opened fire with a target number of 9 and it hit, finishing off the Devastator. The Zeus took on heat due to its critically damaged engine, but at this point, there's no time to worry about that. The player quoted Blaine from the movie Predator, "I ain't got time to bleed." The Blackjack at point blank range and firing from across the map, the Orion, both take aim at the Charger. Target number for the Blackjack was 6 and a 7 for the Orion. They both hit, dealing enough damage to destroy the Charger. The Pouncer opens fire at the heavily damaged Blue Grasshopper and nails it, dealing 4 damage, which was enough to destroy it. The Loki, Atlas, Banshee, and the rest of the light mechs open fire on the Red Grasshopper. Using lucky points, all hit except for the Atlas, dealing 14 damage, which was more than enough to take out the Red Grasshopper. The entire Lance has now been wiped out. The mechs on top of the dropship split up their firing, with the Firefly and Blackhawk targeting the Wolfhound. The target number was a 10. The Blackhawk missed, but the Firefly scored a hit on the mech's rear armor, dealing a total of 6 damage. This left the mech with 1 structure point and critical damage to the mech's weapons. The 2 Phoenix Hawks, Wraith, Spectre, and the Assassin all take aim at the rear arc of the Highlander. Target number was a 9, and using lucky points they all hit except the Assassin, dealing 10 damage, plus an additional 4 damage for the rear arc, for a total of 14 damage, which was barely enough to take out the mech. Top Hat's first mech company split up their fire too. The 2 hatchmen opened fire on the Wolfhound, wanting to finish it off, and despite the low target number, only 1 hit, but it was still enough damage to take out the mech. The Fire Lance and the entire medium Battle Lance opens fire on the Malsakari. With the exception of the Trebuchet and the Star Slayer, they all hit, dealing 21 points of damage, and the mech is destroyed. Holy smokes, the Chupacabras lost 7 mechs in that shooting round. They can now return fire, and luckily all the downed mechs can still shoot back. But first, the objectives. All the mechs in the center take aim at 4 of the red buildings. Unfortunately, the 2 processing towers have line of sight blocked by the currently standing red buildings, so they'll have to wait till next turn to strike them down. The target numbers were not the problem. It was getting enough damage divvied out amongst the buildings to make sure they were destroyed. Each building has a construction factor of 5, so they each have 5 hit points. But in the end, the 4 buildings were all destroyed. The Ad Hoc Armor Lance and the Kraken take aim at the heavily damaged Zeus and Kingfisher. The target number is an 8 for both mechs, and they were both dealt enough damage to be destroyed. The Battle Armor Infantry takes aim at the Firefly, perched high above them on the dropship, and opens fire with a target number of 7. 3 hit, dealing 6 damage, which was enough to take the mech out. The Blue Marauder Lance and the Blood-Asp Lance split their fire between the Longbow and the Camo Archer. Target numbers range between 6 and 7. And still needing to use lucky points, all mechs hit, dealing enough damage to destroy both of them. At this point, the Chupacabra player realizes Grasshoppers had a better damage at medium range rather than at short. But the players were already not being sensible, might as well be sloppy too. Anyway, the Grasshoppers and the 2 Ontos tanks split their shooting between the Pouncer and the Griffin 2C, and both mechs were destroyed. And that brings shooting to a close. Both sides lost 7 mechs each. That's 14 mechs. That's more than a mech company, all destroyed. Also, 4 out of the 6 red buildings were destroyed, leaving just 2 buildings standing in the way of the Chupacabra victory. Let's get into turn 4. Top Hat checks the distance on his inbound assault infantry. He rolled an 8, so they are 4 distant points away, and they will most likely arrive next turn. Top Hat won the initiative, so the Chupacabras will need to move and shoot first for this turn. At this point, the Chupacabra player wanted his dropship to lift off. This brought about an interesting discussion about what should happen to the mechs foolishly standing on top of it. Eventually, we just had the mechs fall straight down. They didn't take any fall damage, but just for this turn, they gained the immobilized status and cannot move. It was the simplest solution, but I think it would have been cool if the mechs were bailing off the ship and being flung all over the battlefield. For proportional movement, the Chupacabras will need to move 3 units. First, the player activates his Battle Armor Infantry Lance, and tries to move in and get behind these immobilized mechs. The Ad Hoc Armor Lance also does the same. And finally, the Phoenix Hawk 2C jumps into amongst the rubble with a clear shot of the red processing towers. Top Hat activates his 3rd mech company. The majority of the company is immobilized since they had to jump for their lives from the dropship. So that leaves 2 Banshees, who move into cover and line up shots on the Phoenix Hawks 2C's rear arc, and the Dasher moves into cover behind them. The Chupacabras need to activate 2 units for proportional movement. The player activates the Ontos tanks and move on top of the landing pad, trying to line up shots on the 2 red processing towers. The Chupacabra then activates his 1st mech company. The Blue Marauder Lance doesn't want to move out into the firing line of those immobilized light mechs, so they stand still. The Blood Asp Lance backs up, putting their backs into a rock wall, while at the same time keeping Top Hat's 1st mech company in their sights. The Dragonfly, Javelin, and the 2 Centaurians push straight through the middle, losing some movement speed to the rubble. Top Hat activates his 1st mech company. The Light Battle Lance and the Fire Lance both ground move to break line of sight with the Blood Asp Lance, while at the same time keeping the Blue Marauder Lance in their sights. The Hatchetmen were overjoyed. For now, they had the opportunity to finally hit something with their hatchet. But even with their size and melee ability, the damage is only a 3, which is the same as their short-range weapons. So this melee attack would only be useful if either the weapons were destroyed, or you just wanted bragging rights. And that is what the player wanted. The Hatchetmen charged forward and attacked the Centaurian, cutting him down where he stood. The Chupacabras needed to move their last unit, and they activate their 2nd mech company. The Locust ground moves into position next to the Phoenix Hawk 2C, and the mighty Yellow Jenner jumps into the rubble, lining up its sights on the red processing towers. The rest of the company ground moves forward with a quick draw, finding some cover. Top Hat activates his last unit, the 2nd mech company. The light mechs ground move into position behind the Ontos tanks, while the heavy battle lance stands still but turns to face the Chupacabras inside their perimeter. The Bushwhacker and Blackjack ground move into cover directly in front of the quick draw. And that brings movement to a close, onto the shooting phase. The Chupacabras will shoot first. The Chupacabras take aim at the last 2 standing red buildings, the processing towers. It took the combined firepower of the Phoenix Hawk 2C, the mighty Yellow Jenner, the Blue Locust, and the Kraken from across the map to shoot and destroy the 2 buildings. But they were able to complete their objective, but at great cost in personnel and equipment. And you know what? The shooting is not over yet. The 2 Ontos tanks rotated their turrets and opened fire on the Chameleon. The target number was a 6 and they both hit, dealing a total of 10 damage, which was enough to take out the mech. All the Chupacabra mechs in the middle all opened fire at the Blackjack. The target number for the quick draw was a 7 and a 9 for the rest of the mechs. Only the Panther and Javelin missed. The rest all hit, dealing a total of 12 damage, which was enough to take the mech out. The Battle Armor Infantry and the Ad Hoc Lance opened fire on the mechs that just fell off the departing dropship. Since the mechs were considered immobilized for this turn, the target numbers were so low they barely mattered. With a shot at the rear arc, the SRM carrier took the red Phoenix Hawk down all by itself. At the end, both Phoenix Hawks and the Black Hawk were all destroyed and the assassin had all of its armor melted off. And finally, the Blue Marauder and Rifle. They both take aim at the red Hatchman, who already had 4 damage from a previous engagement, and open fire and destroy. The Blood Asp and Grizzly take aim at the blue Hatchman and open fire. The target number was an 8, and using their last lucky point, they both hit, dealing 10 damage, which was enough to destroy the mech. Top Hat can now return fire, and the remnants of the 1st mech company open fire on the already damaged Blue Marauder and Rifleman. The Marauder was destroyed, and the Rifleman was reduced down to only 1 structure point left, receiving critical damage to its weapons and its engine. The immobilized mechs that were still standing took revenge on the Battle Armor Infantry, opening fire and vaporizing 1 troop and doling out 2 damage to the other. The other 3, they were destroyed but they could still shoot back this turn, opened fire on the Blood Asp at medium range with a target number of 7. Despite using lucky points, only one Phoenix Hawk and the Black Hawk hit, dealing 5 damage, which removed the last of the Blood Asp's armor. Next up, the Bushwhacker and Dasher opened fire on the SRM carrier with a target number of 8, and they both hit, dealing 4 damage. This caused motive damage and critical damage to its weapons. Next, the light armor battling with the tanks all take aim at the severely damaged tank and open fire. They dealt enough damage to completely destroy the tank. The Banshees and the destroyed Blackjack shooted the quick draw, dealing it 7 damage, which caused 2 structure damage and critical damage to its movement. And finally, the Heavy Battlelands of Top Hat's 2nd Mech Company opened fire on the Phoenix Hawk 2C and the Locust. Using lucky points, they all hit, dealing enough damage to take out the Locust, as well as finish off the Phoenix Hawk 2C. And that brings shooting to a close. Top Hat lost another 7 mechs in that shooting turn, and the Chupacabras lost 4 mechs and a tank. The Chupacabras also have destroyed all the red and blue buildings, making the starport completely inoperable. Mission successful, but at a great cost. And this is when my heart broke, and maybe yours will too, because we ran out of time. This was being filmed back when there was a bunch of holidays, so families came first. So we had to call the battle here. And what a battle! A total of 28 mechs, 1 tank, and 1 battle arm infantry were destroyed. The players really wanted to battle it out and see who would be the last mech standing. But time does what it wants, regardless of what we do. Personally, I think Top Hat would have came out on top, pun intended. To illustrate this, let's see the forces that were still in the fight at the end of turn 4. Take a look at this awkward class photo of the Chupacabras. They still had 11 mechs, 5 vehicles, and 3 battle armor infantry units. And you know what? The mighty Ella Jenner survived, which surprised me, to be honest. I guess he is truly mighty, or maybe just lucky. Anyway, the Chupacabras were still a dangerous force to be reckoned with. But then there's Top Hat, who had 20 mechs still left on the field. And don't forget, the assault infantry were still inbound as well. Though I imagine they would see this battlefield and said nope, and turn around and go home. Now granted, both forces were spread out all over the place and not massed at all. And I think the Chupacabras on average had the highest damage output. So really this battle would have turned into a competition to see who can defeat who in detail the fastest. I really wish we could have seen it though. But leave in the comments, who do you think would have been the last mech standing? Or maybe it was one of the infantry or a vehicle? And you know, things would have gone differently if the Chupacabras didn't focus the buildings down. They destroyed 14 buildings and each building had 5 hit points each. That's 70 points of damage that could have potentially been thrown at Top Hat's forces. Oh well, hindsight is 20/20 and we may never know. So the starport was successfully destroyed by the Hail Mary offensive of the Chupacabras. Now this is where the waters get muddy. If the players were sensible mercenaries, then Top Hat would have won this conflict with a transaction and conditional surrender by the Chupacabras. However, if the Chupacabras were insane and were gung-ho to do an all-out attack and throw their lives away for an objective, then the Chupacabras would have won with a Pyrrhic victory. But if you ask me to choose a winner, then I will say I am the winner because I got to host this campaign. And I know what you're thinking, that's a lame response, but oh well, that's just how the cookie crumbles. And speaking of cookies, we shared the cookie cake, each getting 1/3 of the cookie as spoils of war to take home and share with their family. So that's a win. So this brings the conflict of Archer Sierra to a close. So many lives were lost for this lucrative, lifeless rock. I hope you enjoyed the conflict of Archer Sierra. If you want to run this campaign on your own, come to our Patreon site and pick up a copy of the campaign guide. The players for this campaign have finished their training day and will be joining the other 4 players in the conflict of Bluehole. The ceasefire there has allowed the players to build up their armies and prepare for a large-scale war. Like moths to the flame, mercenaries and warlords have flocked to the banners on both sides, either seeking glory or profit. Some fight because they fear the tyranny of Vesper Marches, some fight because they fear the League is just Jade Falcon's version 2.0, and some fight and fuel this conflict simply because they will profit by seeing the conflict continue, weakening the Vesper Marches and the Alyena Mercantile League. And the players have been busy. In the first 2 phases of the conflict, they each had an army about the size of a battalion each. Now, each side has seen their armies swell to 3 regiments, for a total of 12 to 15 battalions on each side of this conflict. Yeah, this is no longer a brushfire war, this is turning into an all-out war, and it's gonna be wild. Anyway, the next video to come out will be the Road to War for Phase 3 for Bluehole. And then we'll get back into the narrative battle reports. And I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on Bluehole.